Hey class, today we're going to talk about trigonometric functions, the unit circle, which is found in section 4.2 part 1. Our objectives are to identify a unit circle and its relationship to real numbers and to evaluate trigonometric functions using the unit circle. All right, so in our the bell work technically of this lesson is a YouTube video that goes over the unit circle. It goes over how to find different coordinate points for different angles along the unit circle, and a whole bunch of other things. It's just a really cool and neat way to learn the unit circle. So with that being said, typically like just the definition way of remembering the unit circle is what you see below. So remember the unit circle. Remember, if a circle has one unit, oops, I shouldn't have done that. If a circle has one unit, right, the radius is a length of 1. At 0, it would be considered 1, 0, right? So what they're talking about here with the x and y is just in general, any x, y, sine would be the y value, cosine would be the x value, right? Tangent would be the y over the x. Then cosecant would be the inverse of y, or 1 over y. Secant would be 1 over x because it's the inverse of cosine. And then cotangent would be x over y because it is the inverse of tangent. Alrighty, so, or I shouldn't say the inverse. None of those were inverses, the reciprocal of those. So with all that being said, we're going to practice finding the trig functions of these certain angles. So the first one, we're going to evaluate the 6 trig functions for if theta is pi over 6. So I'm just going to kind of sketch this out. If theta is considered pi over 6, it would be somewhere over here. So this angle here, remember pi over 6 in degrees is 30 degrees. And I typically always just remember the ordered pair. And first of all, it's in quadrant 1, so that means it's positive. So everything is positive. So that means sine, cosine, and tangent are all positive in quadrant 1. And then the other thing that I just have learned along the way, so because I always kind of get confused with my ordered pairs, is I always remember that sine of 30 is 1/2. So if I know that sine is 1/2 and sine is the y value, that means that I'm really kind of focusing on square root of 3 over 2, comma 1/2. Okay, so then to find my 6 trig functions, sine of theta, which I already knew, would be 1/2. Cosine of theta is square root of 3 over 2. Tangent then would be y over x, or sine over cosine. So that's 1/2. And I'm just going to say divided by the square root of 3 over 2, because that's essentially what it is, right? If it's over, it's divided by. But since it's divided, you have to multiply by the reciprocal, so that's 1/2 times 2 over the square root of 3. And these will cancel, and I'm left with 1 over the square root of 3. However, we always rationalize our denominators. We do not keep radicals in the denominator, so we have to multiply by square root of 3 over square root of 3. In the end, tangent theta is going to be square root of 3 over 3. All right. Let's keep going. So then we know that the reciprocal functions, so the reciprocal of sine is cosecant, so that's CSC theta, would be just the reciprocal of 1/2, and reciprocal of 1/2 is 2. The reciprocal function for cosine is secant, so that's SEC theta, and that would be 2 over the square root of 3. However, again, we don't leave radicals in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply by square root of 3 over square root of 3. So that gives me 2 square root of 3 over 3. And then the last one, cotangent theta. Again, just a second ago, actually at this point right here, that was our answer, right? Before we rationalized it. So cotangent theta, all I have to do is find the reciprocal of 1 over square root of 3, and that is the square root of 3. So these are the 6 trig functions for pi over 6, or 30 degrees. All right, for the next one, I have to clear everything off the screen. So I hope you've got it. I got to clear everything, and then we will do some erasing. So let me see if I can just... erase that. Okay, perfect. All right, so this next one, if theta is 0, if we're thinking about it being 0, that means that, remember, the terminal side is over here. So if theta is 0, then that means we're talking essentially about the positive x-axis. And the positive x-axis as a point would be 1, 0. So everything that we're talking about, all the 6 trig functions, are referring to 1, 0. So sine theta, remember sine is your y value, so sine theta is 0. Cosine theta would be 1. Tan theta would be sine divided by cosine. So that'd be 0 divided by 1, which is 0. Okay, find the reciprocal functions. Sine matches with cosecant. So cosecant theta would be, well, originally this is technically like 0 over 1, right? So if I try to do 1 over 0, there is no cosecant because it's undefined. Okay, secant theta is the reciprocal of cosine theta. The reciprocal of 1 is just 1. And then cotangent theta, which is the reciprocal of tangent theta. Remember, it was already 0 over 1, so again, it becomes 1 over 0, which is also undefined. And that's it. That's try number 1. Or example number 1. Let's look at try number 1 now. All right, this is our last one. So again, we're going to evaluate the 6 trig functions. I hope you do remember that if you have a pi over 4, pi over 4s are always the same ordered pair. That ordered pair is always the square root of 2 over 2 comma square root of 2 over 2. However, what we do need to remember is what quadrant it falls in. Now 5 pi over 4, remember, is just a little bit past 4 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4 is pi, which is 180 degrees. So that means it's not in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, but it falls in quadrant 3. And what we know about quadrant 3, if we think about, I think I gave this to you before, but it's all students take calculus. Tangent is negative in that quadrant. So sine and cosine are both positive, sine and cosine are both negative. So tangent is the only thing that's positive over there. So what this means is both of these should be negative values. Okay. So here we go. Sine of theta, remember, is the y value, so that's negative square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of theta is also negative square root of 2 over 2. So then tangent theta, remember, is sine theta divided by cosine theta. And again, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, which we already knew tangent was going to be positive. But we need to go ahead and multiply by the reciprocals. That'd be square root of 2 over 2. And I changed them to positive because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So I'm just dealing with the math. So square root of 2 over 2 times 2 over the square root of 2. Both of these will cancel, so we're left with 1. Tangent is 1. All right, sine then matches with cosecant theta. So cosecant theta, just again, it's the reciprocal. So this is going to be negative 2 over the square root of 2. However, you got to multiply by square root of 2 over square root of 2. And that will leave us with negative 2 square root of 2 over 2. Since sine and cosine were the same, that means cosecant and secant theta will also be the same. So I don't need to do the math. It's still just negative 2 square root of 2 over 2. And then cotangent theta, the reciprocal of 1 is still just 1. So it is 1. And that's it. And again, in the end, you want to double check and make sure that your signs are correct. And again, tangent and cotangent are the only things that are supposed to be positive because it falls in the third quadrant. All right, again, with this last problem, I need to clear everything. So I'm going to erase everything. And let's start over. So if theta is pi, thinking about where that falls, pi is over here. It's the negative x-axis. So if I think about the unit circle, which means the radius is 1, that means that ordered pair is -1, 0. That means that it was like a full 180 degrees from the initial side. So sine theta, remember, is the y value, so that's 0. Cosine theta is -1. Tangent theta is sine over cosine, so 0 over -1, which is 0. Find the reciprocal function. Sine is cosecant theta. So remember, that was really 0 over 1, so now it's 1 over 0, which makes this now undefined. Secant theta is a reciprocal of -1, so that's -1, and cotangent theta is now -1 over 0, but again, that's also undefined. All right, guys, that is it for today. If you have any questions, please be sure to come see me for tutoring.